So welcome to my latest video. And on the back of having a great interview with Tropic Marine last year and Dr. Tim's about a month ago, I'm now delighted that we've got two guys from Ecotech, and anyone who's a reefer needs no introduction to Ecotech. The reason why I asked if I could have an interview with these guys, because I've been a user of Ecotech since I started reefing about 10 years ago, right from the beginning when they're kind of the old Vortex that made all the noise, right up to the QD. And today I use Radions that I've had for about 9 years and 5 years, and also MP40s that are 5 or 6 years old. So in my eyes, they're one of the best on the market, and they've got the longevity. I touch wood now, but the longevity in terms of those products last. And also I'd like to thank Exodus, which is the UK distributor for Ecotech. So a big shout out to Steve and Jez, who have made the introduction to Jay and also to Cade today. So welcome, guys. Thank you for taking the time to be with myself and also the people who watch the YouTube channel. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourselves before we dive into some questions about Ecotech?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having us. I'll let Jay start off.
So I am the Vice President of Marketing at Aperture, which is obviously the parent company of the Ecotech brand. Before that, I was Sales and Marketing Director for Ecotech Marine for the past, I don't know, it must be 15 years, pretty much since the early days. So a little bit before you started using the product, but not too much more before. And, cool. And this is Cade.
Yeah, my name's Cade. I have been with Ecotech for probably 7 years, 8 years now, something like that. I've been keeping fish forever. I am marketing brand manager over at Ecotech, so I oversee brands such as Ecotech AI, Neptune, Hello Reef, all of our major brands. I like to keep an eye on and hopefully let you guys enjoy them.
Yeah, cool. Well, we'll dive into that because obviously I'm badging it as Ecotech, but some people might be watching, what's the connection with all those other brands? And obviously you've got an AI t-shirt, but we'll kind of hold that thought and come back to that because there's some really interesting work that's gone in the background and the relationship between those companies that's evolved over the years. So I'd like to go back to kind of tell us a little bit about the history of Ecotech. I know, Jay, you've been with kind of 15 years, which is almost at the start, although I don't know how long the company's been going. So it'd be good just to understand a little bit about where the company started, what's the ethos, how it's evolved, that kind of thing. So I think that certainly interests me and hopefully quite a few of the viewers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to steal too much of the thunder. I think we have some of this content available on our YouTube channel that goes back with the original founders. So the original founders of the company were Tim Marks, Justin Lawyer, and Patrick Clayson. Mm-hmm. Tim Marks and Justin Lawyer started actually while they were in college. If I mistell a story a little bit, then it's not my story to tell. So we'll leave it at that. But they were making cow phosphor reactors in their dorm rooms and selling them online. Cool. I think through MRC and maybe Reef Central, I think was the major forum back then. And from then they, along with Patrick, got together. Patrick and Tim were at Lehigh University, which is also where I went, which is how I know Pat and Tim. And they got some grant money together, and they also got a contract from a company called Ice Cap that's still around in Brandon.
Yeah, I know the name. Yeah,
who was doing battery backups and that wanted a pump to go with the battery backup. And from there, one thing led to another, and that was how the Vortech, the original Vortech, was born. And then with small grants and assistance from the local business community, the three of them were basically able to get up and running. And at the beginning, there was they were a little more than prototypes, because back then, I mean, even there was kind of a few of the large companies, but we're very successful now that we're very lucky now, I think, as Reef Aquarius, that there's actually so many companies producing equipment and aquariums and things of that nature. Because back then it was still very much, there was a couple incumbents, like Tunzi was there, Eheim, Marineland, some of these large companies that we still know today. But but there was still a lot of DIY, right? And so I think that the novel concept of the Vortech really gained some traction, captured people's imaginations. Jake Adams actually was a big proponent of the original Vortech, because at the time, obviously, people used metal halides, and heat in tank was a big deal. So having a pump that was magnetically coupled, where the heat and the electricity was outside of the tank, was a big deal. So that kind of that rolled along. I joined the company back about that time. I was at school, and I came on board as part of an MBA project, and then ended up sticking around for all of this time. Ever since. And yeah, I mean, and it started with the Vortex, and there were a couple iterations of that. So we went from the MP40 to an MP20 to the MP10 to the MP60, and then the Radion. Obviously, the lighting kind of changed the company a lot and put it on the map. And then from there, obviously, the story of the various other products comes and goes. Yeah, and I mean, it was very much a starting from nothing and building it just piece by piece into a large company that supplies products. I wouldn't say a large company, but a large small company. You know, a medium small company in the aquarium space.
I would say in the reef, and maybe different in the US to the UK, but if you look at it as kind of the top 3 or 4 companies, you would say Ecotech would be on most people's list as that, probably along with Red Sea from an aquarium perspective, because I think they fundamentally changed with the Red Sea reefers how aquariums were bought and looked. And then obviously a lot of people, including myself, hung the Radions over that, and they've gone from Gen 2 all the way through, and probably the timing was right for when Ecotech launched that, because it's very much in the early days, wasn't it, of LEDs, and people think they can't really grow corals, where now you would say that LEDs are the go-to. Some people still look at a bit of a hybrid, and some really old school may have some other lights, but predominantly it is now LEDs for a whole host of reasons, heat being one of them, and also the lastability as well. I mean, I've got a Radion that's 9 years old, and it's still growing SPS, and Gen 3. It's brilliant.
That's the big thing. I think since LEDs have been out, they've really shown what they can do. I mean, we have a long enough period of time now to show what can actually be grown under just LEDs with no other supplemental lighting. I mean, it's impressive what they can do. And like you said, I mean, it is probably the new gold standard. Obviously, the other ones people still love, like T5s and everything along those lines. But again, they are definitely a game changer. And topping on just age, we did turn 20 years old. So Ecotech is 20 years old. We're running our 20th year campaign on social media. Jay told the story pretty much accurately, but if you want to hear it from the founding guys on our YouTube channel, we actually sat down with them and they went through the whole story of it starting. So that's definitely cool bits to check out.
There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, particularly about the very first few days kind of thing.
Stuff that you didn't even know. So
yeah, exactly. Cool. And you touched on a great point too, just about the efficacy of LEDs. I mean, it's one of the things we kind of take for granted now because we're so many generations deep into LED lighting from our brands and from others. But actually, when it started, it wasn't that way. The AI Soul actually was the first one that actually produced probably enough PAR to grow coral, and then the original generation Radion and and being full spectrum was the first full spectrum LED fixture that could actually grow coral. And that was a big part, actually, probably up to about Gen 3 on Radions, it was just more PAR. It
was blast your corals as much as possible, have as many lights because of the spread, and there was really no subtlety of it at all, was there? It was just blast and blast, and actually we know that a lot of corals, you can give them too much light, and you need a little bit more subtlety. So I think it's like anything in the hobby. If I go back, people were talking about ultra low nutrients. If I go back 4 or 5 years ago, you don't hear hardly anyone mention that anymore. It's all around you need phosphate, you need nitrate, you need those elements in there because you don't want to starve your corals. And that's changed relatively recently, I think. And also with all the other kit you got, you can now have more controllability, whether it be from your lights, your flow, and then your nutrients, which obviously all three of those go hand in hand to make hopefully a great reef tank, don't they? Cool.
It's interesting. It's interesting because I mean, what we notice is much like many other things, right, that kind of follow cycles. The interest in lighting is now reached the point where, because the underlying expectation and knowledge is there that it will grow, the spectrums coming out of these fixtures will work. You know, it's taking care of that now it's going back to personal preference of the user base, which in itself kind of cycles back and forth. The last couple of generations, for instance, of lighting were very much trying to allow people to reproduce the T5 look and feel in terms of just a soft, ambient, consistent lighting. And now, you know, there's this, we're getting this call for more caustics again. So I'm pretty sure that's going to be one of those things which goes back and forth over time between what people like. People get used to seeing a very animated, dramatic look in their aquarium, and then they're going to ask for it to be more homogeneous. And then when everyone gets used to looking at that, then they're going to, oh, wow, the sparkle and shimmer looks really good. I think we should go back to, get sparkle and shimmer in there, right? And it's reminds me of automobiles, right? Like round, hard, right?
Yeah, it's like Kalkwasser, isn't it? Kalkwasser, you mentioned that earlier on. Kalkwasser kind of went out of favor. And then, of course, pH, all of a sudden that, you know, no one talks about really pH for years. pH now, get pH, you're virtually guaranteed to get a great tank. Not the case, but certainly pH helps. And of course, Kalkwasser, you put it in there to dose, and the byproduct is pH. And some people using Kalkwasser as the primary to help buffer your pH. So again, that's got in cycle, and is obviously it's not new because it's been around for donkey's years, but it's back in favor probably the last 3 years, maybe, I would say. So as you say, things go in cycles and go in and out of fashion, don't they? And I'm sure that will continue. So thank you. If I just kind of move us on. So you obviously, we touched a little bit, you've got the AI t-shirt on there. Yeah. Can you just tell us a little bit about the connection between AI and Ecotech? Because some people will know the connection, as I do, and others won't know and may not care or not. But I think it's good to understand the connectivity between the two brands.
Yeah, I think that's kind of it, what you hit on. I mean, we are connected. We've been the same company for and under the same roof for, I think, 6 years, 7 years.
It might even be longer.
7, 8. It's been a while since we've been working together. And I think the biggest thing that came from it they were two of the top brands in LEDs and lighting when it came into it. But they also hit that different market. Yeah. Where, like you said, like Ecotech is that professional grade. Ecotech's going to hit on what you're doing, your coral spawning, all of that you're digging into. And AI is just that fun, simple brand that simply just works. You can get it, you can set it up, you could just understand how to use it right away. So again, it's a great brand. You can do anything with both of them, but they each have their little nuances that you can kind of feed off on. So again, we've been working together, manufacturing just works together. It makes sense that we could have two different models of lights under two different company names.
Cool. And is there a sharing of technology that between the two, or is it when AI leads the way maybe sometimes in technology? Because you see, certainly I've seen more product launches from AI in the last few years than you have from Ecotech, for example.
Yeah, I think it's more. I mean, I think in this might be touched on later, but I mean, part of it is the brands certainly have different looks and feels and appeal to people for different reasons. There's also there is a price difference typically between the products, and there's also a slightly different philosophy between what they're trying to accomplish, which is what Cade was talking about. Whereas typically what's happened with Ecotech is it's about putting in this huge amount of flexibility and capability into the products that services the needs of people who have a very discerning or specific desire, and then being able to achieve to that. Whereas the AI brand, for probably simplifying it maybe a little bit too much, but we noticed that a lot of people who purchase AI equipment purchase it because they might be a little less tech interested. They want the results of having an amazing looking aquarium and have amazing success without potentially all of this controllability, with all of this discussion about things like spectrum and PAR or flow and flow modes and all that kind of thing. So where the products have gone in terms of the two brands is a bit about innovation. It's a bit about price. It's a bit about materials and quality. And then it's a bit about just functionality. And the two brands had different audiences, because that was one of the things before we became one company, that there was always this notion that the two companies were competing. But in reality, what we found was that a lot of the user base from each company actually had a pretty different perception of what it was that they wanted out of their aquarium equipment. And that was something that was really cool, that we were able to try to at least continue as we went forward as one company with the two brands in terms of the development and what goes into those individual products. So staying true, I think, to what the brands were about is kind of why there's still two brands. And people certainly have their preference of one versus the other for all kinds of different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. I obviously I knew I was going to get you guys on to have a chat, so I talked to some local reefers about what they were going to ask and other stuff. So I just got a few questions here. So I've got a nano tank here, and I can't put an MP10 on it because it would just be too much flow. The guys were saying, well, actually, would Ecotech bring out, what do you call it, an MP5 or whatever it is that's really there for nano tanks? Because the guys that I've got MP4, not in here, MP40s on the tanks in the garage. I love them. And one thing, don't change the MPs, because I was speaking to my LFS and he said, whatever you do, we do not want a change of the Ecotech. The technology works. It does what it says in the tin. I know you can kind of have the crest mode and things like that, but don't mess around with it.
Yeah, I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head with it, and it's kind of been seen from the Vortech since it's been launched. I mean, it is such a great design. We're able to fine tune it to be super reliable pump and work as you need it. And still to this day, it hasn't aged with how long ago the Vortech has came out, because it still is such a unique technology that works and gives you the flow and spread you on. I do want to say, I do think you can run an MP10 on that. I have an MP10 and a Nero 3 in my 15-gallon on my desk just fine. So I think you could still run an MP10 and dial down.
I've got a Nero 3 on the back.
Okay.
If I did try an MP10, there was two things. One, I had to turn it right down. And I'm thinking that defeats the object of an MP10 if I'm running it at 10, 15%. It's kind of not doing it personal view. Okay. And also it's a peninsula. It's the Max Nano Peninsula, so it's a small peninsula. I didn't want to have the powerhead on the side. Yeah. Some people do. So I love the Nero because it's really slick. You can put it on the back, and I can have the magnet on as well. So I check the magnet every so often, but I know it's submersible because I did ask the UK distributor. So I like the Nero on the back because it's nice and slick. So for that, it's work. But some people said they would use an MP5, should we say, on that kind of thing. So would you? I know it's hard because you may not be answered the question. Would you move away from your 10s, 40s, and 60s, or do you think that actually you've got three types and they fit the marketplace that you're in?
I think you just kind of answered it. Actually, is that the pump really that comes from our company that fits that application would be the Nero 3.
Yeah.
And part of that is I'm sure this is a question we'll probably get to down the road, but just in terms of manufacturing costs, design, things of that nature, it is certain types of pumps or form factors work better for different applications, and it is smaller pump, particularly a Vortech, would be very difficult because of magnet coupling. I don't want to speak on behalf of the engineers. I think actually the direction, or that we get asked a lot, is if there'd be an MP10 that could span a thicker glass, because with tanks having gotten thicker, the MP10 in particular comes up short in terms of the gap that it can cover depending on glass thickness, which then forces you to choose between a bigger MP40, which might be a little on the large side, and a Nero 5 or a Nero 3, depending on what it is you're trying to achieve.
So that was one of my questions, because I've got a Red Sea 170 and I put it on the back glass. and it's quite, sometimes you can't always get the magnet to work. So I end up with the cable having to hold it in place, and then it just about works on it. So like one of my questions around the doability of somehow having some kind of MP10 that has a stronger magnet on it. But I suppose, is that to do with the engineering and how that would work is the issue, or?
Yeah, you're kind of asking us out of our depth here. I would imagine it to do with it would require re-engineering a fair amount of the pump, simply because of the geometry related to the thickness, the magnetic coupling. That has to be, I think, to a very specific ratio or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it in my mind too. It's like, to make a magnet stronger, you essentially got to make it bigger. I mean, so at that point, you're then just making an MP40, which works on thicker glass. So, and again, the beauty of the pumps, they are fully controllable, so you can dial it down. Some people might, oh, you're not getting the full use of it. But I like to say that you still are, because you can still run in the low mode ranges and still get that flex. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, and it's definitely something that comes up a lot. And I think it would be a cool challenge to grow their engineering team. Be like, hey, what can you
I think the reason why I wouldn't put an MP40 on a tank for MP10 is purely the price point.
Yes.
Because if you look at there is quite a big gap in the price point, and I totally understand that. And we'll come on to price in a little bit. But for me, if you're looking at that price point, I would go for the 10 and the 40, because if you don't need it, if I look at the Vortex, they last me. I've got some that are 8 years old. I've had to have a new wet side, but after 5 years, if I have to replace the wet side, I'm okay with that. That's the longevity. If I can get 8 to 10 years out of a pump, then you say go for a 40 rather than a 10, because over those 10 years, it's peanuts, isn't it, in the scheme of reefing? But that's I suppose the barrier to me of putting an MP40 on a smaller tank when I don't need it is purely that price point. But that's kind of where I'm coming from on that. But I totally get, if they could do that, I think that would help, because if you have a look at, certainly, I think, not where people have gone, there's a lot more nanos around. If you go back 5 years ago, there was hardly any. There was the 170 on the Red Sea. That's one of the smallest. Now you've got a massive range of MaxSpect and Cade and all kinds of companies that are coming in at that kind of 75 to say 120. Whether 120 is a nano is another discussion. But in terms of a small cube that's no bigger than 2 foot square, and quite a lot of them are smaller, that's definitely where the hobby has gone. I think probably because of the cost of living crisis around the energy bills and everything else, and the hobby is expensive, and more people have downgraded, haven't they, to save them leaving the hobby. So, and maybe that puts AI more in the brand for those than it does Ecotech from a pump
price point. Yeah, exactly. Price point and everything. And even like the use cases, like you said, I mean, a lot of those nano tanks, a lot of people like to run their pumps on the back wall because it doesn't take away that viewing space. So again, that's why there are the different brands and the different feel and different fit for all the use cases. So again, MP10 on those sizes would be cool, and it would be just a cool challenge for the engineers to see if they could do, but I don't know if it fits necessarily the market fully for what it is.
No,
I think the other part of it too is that, I mean, we've tried to address that as much. I mean, that people always talk about, people are always concerned about when companies come together because they feel like what they like about a certain company or product line is going to be jeopardized by that, right? And I think that starting with when Ecotech and AI came together, was that actually the choice didn't go away. All of the core components of each product line stayed. Actually, they expanded. But more importantly, what happened is that each product doesn't always fit exactly into a use case scenario, right? And no matter what you do, you can either have a product line that gets long and confusing for people to understand, and you have all these different versions of things, which most of which nobody ever uses, or you can kind of focus on these things that really define the brand. And what we did with Ecotech and AI is that's where the whole Mobius integration and with Neptune now the MXM integration comes in, is that you can have it all run out of one app. even though they're not the same product. And yeah, obviously there's going to be some compromise in that maybe you really love the Vortech design, but in this exact situation, the Vortech is not the best pump, but you now have the option of a submersible pump from AI or potentially from or Neptune as well, or you also have now a rotary style pump like the Gyre Orbit, right? So all of those are now under one one control platform, so you can integrate all these different types of flow and capability into the same tank, even if you have to make a little bit of sacrifice from brand to brand under the umbrella, so to speak. So
okay, cool. I'd like to touch upon Mobius because I know certainly it started off in AI and it came over to Ecotech. How did you deal with, because
it was other way.
Sorry,
Ecotech first, then AI.
So,
was the Mobius technology based on the AI? Because AI had the app first, didn't they? Because obviously you used to have the box for Ecotech.
So Ecotech had EcoSmart Live.
That's
so
right.
EcoSmart Live was Wi-Fi to web based,
and
you needed a reef link to go from local RF control, because if you remember the original Radions, you had to plug in by USB
on the Gen 2. That's what I did.
Yep. And then from there, Wi-Fi, and then the reef link, which converted RF to Wi-Fi, so you could control remotely. And then from there, the app. We had an EcoSmart Live app. Yep. It's funny. It's really going down memory lane here. Meanwhile, AI was always app, and they had the director.
They have a web, the web page
and the web page, right? And then eventually both moved predominantly to Bluetooth control.
Basically, when the first Prime launched, is the first time that integration was put in that you didn't need the director to communicate. But both brands kind of started where they needed that central hub to communicate to the internet. Other than Ecotech, you had to plug in hardwire with connection manager to the computer, download, open up that program.
I remember it well. It wouldn't always connect. Yeah.
No, that was a fun one always. But so you do that, and then the Reef Link came along, and that's when the app came out, because then you had remote control. So you could do it remotely on the road. And then AI always had that with the director, with like the original Hydras, Vegas technically connected to that, as well as the
Vega,
26s, as well as the 26s and the 52s. And then from there, we went to the Prime then launched, and the Prime was the first one that actually had a chip built into it that allowed you to connect via Wi-Fi through the light directly.
Cool. Memory lane. So thank you for that.
But it's interesting because of the fact that it's gone back and forth a few times, and including some of the functionality has come and gone, depending on the hardware, and also how feedback we got about how people used it, right, and what people actually wanted. Also, what people's understanding of what wireless connectivity means varies hugely from individual to individual.
Some people, it would literally say wireless on the box, and they call it like, why does it have wires? And you're like, well.
Go all the way down to like, it doesn't transfer electricity through the air. And
can't do power through the air.
Anyway.
We were always a bit like, if we could do that, we wouldn't be in the aquarium
Aquariums
space.
is not the market for us.
Doing away with all those wires, and you know what a nest of wires and cables we all end up with, and even on the smallest of tanks.
Which is the worst part about the reefing hobby. All the wires and cables.
Yeah, you can't have enough plugs, can you? When people say got 8 plugs, you say maybe double that and then some, depending on the size of the tank and how much technology you want running on it. So
to go back and kind of answer your question with like Mobius and my AI, I think it kind of was one of those things that people liked my AI a lot and still do for certain reasons. People like EcoSmart Live a lot for certain reasons. And then that's when like smart control apps were like really starting to become a thing. And there's a lot of other apps out there for a lot of other different things that you start to pick up on, hey, this is a really cool feature, let's add it. So I would say Mobius wasn't necessarily influenced off any of them. It was kind of one of those hybrids that it's like, how can we make this the best and easiest to understand control platform that's, again, simple and easy to use, that if you just want to pick it up, plug it in, turn on your light, turn on your pump, that can work. Or if you actually wanted to dive in and start to mess around with every single channel, do all those little nitty gritty things that a lot of us reef nerds like to do. So, I mean, it really is one of those things that I don't think it was necessarily fed off of my AI or EcoSmart Live or anything like that. It was just one of those things that it made sense for us where we were at the time on how to bring all of our products that we make together to work together and control.
Yeah, and also customer demand, because I think now if companies launch kit and it's not within an app, I think that then detracts from people buying that. I now expect that on most of the products that I buy in reefing, whether that's rightly or wrongly. I think it's just become the expectation and the bar and the level of entry now is that you get it, you have Wi-Fi, you control, and you can see what's happening in your tank depending on what the piece of kit is when you're not around, and you get alerts for it. So that helps you with saving the tank when you've got controllers of, heat. And I mean, the Apex, I had the classic Apex. That was kind of there was only, I think, one or two when I was around. And now there's a lot more now in different guises, and simplicities are really complicated. And some of them are not controllers, and some of them kind of act like a little bit of a controller. So things have just moved on. Now, one question on Mobius. I mean, I plug and play. So I don't go for Mobius from probably 1 month to another.
Yeah.
Has it moved to Wi-Fi? Because it was Bluetooth only. Is it now Wi-Fi, so you can look at Mobius and look at the kit that you've got if you wanted to turn the lights or something remotely? Because I'm not aware that it is.
So it is still Bluetooth. So Mobius still does run Bluetooth and works on Bluetooth. But if you do want the Wi-Fi capabilities through the MXM, which is the module for the Apex, you can get and then have remote Wi-Fi access to all of your Ecotech AI and Neptune products.
Do you think there will be an evolution at some point on Mobius to use as a Wi-Fi product?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say never they're on that. I mean, it is something that there are the capabilities of doing it. And it's something that is definitely a possibility and something we have worked on and messed around with there in the past. So I definitely wouldn't shut down that opportunity of it happening.
Okay.
There's a lot of inherent capability in the equipment that is and isn't utilized currently. But the part of it too is just the thinking and the timing of the way the companies came together. Was that one of the big things with AI and Ecotech equipment is that none of it really has input devices. So being able to control it remotely usually requires an external controller or controller platform anyway to determine what it is that you might want to do with that equipment. So what we found, generally speaking, was that almost everybody who wanted remote control usually was already typically running a controller platform, namely a Neptune Apex most frequently. And because of that, they were getting the information from that, and they would then control their Ecotech or AI equipment based on information that they were getting from their controller. So then with the integration with Neptune, it seemed to be more prudent, rather than to continue pushing forward on AI, on having Wi-Fi integrated into the Ecotech and AI equipment directly at that time, was simply to make sure that it was all fully, the whole line of both products was fully controllable, or as I think the Versa is the only still exception, right? But that all of them are controllable via MXM directly using Apex, so that you don't have to like use a power bar and use indirect information. They are feeding information directly in, and you can control them directly. But to answer your other question, I mean, we don't know. We can't really talk about what the future is. But yeah, there's a huge opportunity here to do a lot more now that we have all of these different pieces of the puzzle. And hopefully, I mean, it's always the kind of thing too with our equipment in particular, is that these companies have always gone, these brands have gone hugely out of their way, the companies before them, now the brands, to ensure backwards compatibility and to try to bring as much of the old stuff forward, which is something I always feel like we don't get a huge amount of credit for. But it also is one of the things that's, interestingly enough, it's one of the most onerous things as a company from a developmental standpoint, because typically you're talking about technology that was developed several years prior, when that was what the best way to do something was, and then you're trying to bring it forward so that people can use it in the new system. Like case in point, actually, we joke about this one sometimes, but like when we launched the Radion, we were like, oh yeah, we could make it, Wi-Fi was a thing. We can make it Wi-Fi remote controllable. Incidentally, there was there was almost no commercial or residential lighting that you could control with Wi-Fi remotely from the internet. And here we are, this tiny little company doing this for an aquarium product. And if we just had a bigger mindset,
do it for lighting.
Wow, that's a big market there, isn't it?
Yeah, market, right? Like, but we were so, that was the company,
aquarium.
That was Ecotech. We were absolutely focused on delivering to a very high level for people with aquariums, with reef tanks.
I see what you mean about legacy and legacy products and trying to keep them current. Because if you look at people like Apple, their operating systems only go back a certain, and then they go out of support. And I know we're talking about a much bigger company, but then they've got much bigger resources, so they will only go back certain number of years. And of course, then they discontinue. I try and get a phone case for a 13 in their shop. They don't sell them.
Yep.
That's only 2 generations ago. So I think it's a fair point to be able to still support those technologies that are 8, 9, 10 years ago. Because I say it's still supported from a Gen 3 perspective. And also, if any of the technology goes down, they still work. Because I found that on the Apex, where I know there has been some that are connected to the cloud. If there's an issue with the cloud functionality, the memory's not always in the kit, so therefore the kit doesn't work. Which to me, you don't really think about it goes wrong. But I know with Apex, it will still work if there's. I mean, obviously you need electricity. Don't get me wrong, but it is an ecosystem that's not reliant on external factors other than one, which is electricity, which affects everything, of course. So I think that's an advantage as well. And I think that comes into play. I wouldn't buy a piece of kit that if it went down in the cloud, it doesn't work, because things happen on that kind of stuff. So that's always a consideration as well, I suppose. Okay. One more question in relating to what some other reefers saying is, would you make the Radions bigger? You obviously got the 1 puck, which is the 15, the 2 pucks with the 30. And one of the couple of guys I know that have got tanks that are 10 foot, 8 foot, and they've gone for, I suppose, bigger lights. But also I know one guy has gone for 15s, and he's got 20 15s on his tank, which is it's a lot of money, but he likes his tank. Would you consider, do you think there's a market where the Radions you could have more pucks, or is that really not a consideration?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can take this one. So I mean, obviously we have a lot of market data, which I think most, everyone who has an aquarium sees what they would like, right? Everyone has to, but then as a company, you kind of have to make things which work for the majority of people.
Sure.
And because of that, I mean, a 15 and a 30 in various combinations or one and the other pretty much cover the vast majority of home tank situations that range in the sizes of tanks that the vast majority of customers order. And you can use them in singles or multiples in different configurations. The thing, and then the second part of it is, I mean, the trend that hasn't changed is value for money. People always look for more for the same, and obviously everything in our world is getting more and more expensive, across the board, including, unfortunately, aquarium equipment. But, I think that, again, the delivery on what you try to provide is increased. I mean, the coverage, for instance, out of a Radion is almost tripled, I think, out of an XR30, if I'm remembering correctly, from the G1, from the Gen 1s, between a combination of LED placement and geometry. But then in terms of the modular fixtures and the ability for retailers to carry them, for them to be available, that kind of thing, I think the form factors that currently are kind of serve a very good purpose. Is there room for improvement and change on those? Yeah, and I think that in time we'll start to see see that more, maybe more differentiation in terms of different ways to do the lighting. But the 30 and the 15 cover a lot of different tank depths, different mounting heights, different widths, different tank dimensions. So,
and I think Jay kind of nailed that on the head there, where it covers the majority of the people at the tanks. And for those people who do have the larger tanks, think of it like coral farms. Like, look at Top Shelf Aquatics over here in the United States. They needed something that penetrated par a little bit deeper. So that's when we changed the optics, because most tanks at the home are not that deep. So the Gen 5 and Gen 6 have a great spread, and the par coverage is great, and it will cover a home aquarium. But if you need a very deep penetration of par, then you get the narrow optic lens, which is going to have it increase the par towards the bottom of the tank. So there's ways to change the lights that you have. Again, mounting might not be as easy, putting them over a much larger tank, especially if it's wire like 4 foot by 4 foot or something along those lines. But yeah, I think for what we have, it's going to cover a vast majority of people have a reef tank.
And I suppose commercially, your products need to have as wide a range of appeal as possible, because you need to make the market as big as possible, because you got to get your costs back and make a buck.
Yeah, business.
Yeah, absolutely. So we stick on prices, because I see people say they believe Ecotech products are pricey and the price point is higher than it should be. Be interesting to discuss a kind of thoughts on that, because obviously you have development costs and you have manufacturing costs, but how would you kind of answer that question around the pricing of Ecotech products?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think all of us would like everything to cost less.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's really it. And actually, that's kind of one of the weird, it's one of the things which is an interesting discussion, I think, that goes on, is that actually in the case of most products, the desire is just to sell as much of it as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And people think that it's like that the companies are trying to gouge consumers all the time. The reality of it is usually that companies don't want to gouge consumers, because the better value you can offer for the money, the more successful the product's going to be. And incrementally selling more of them is much more valuable than making more money off a lot less of them, if that makes sense. And especially when you get into the economics of manufacturing. So, when you look at the cost breakdown of a product that, for instance, Ecotech sells, there's margins in there. There's the margin that, that you said, obviously there's costs associated with building, supporting, overhead for the company, all of that kind of thing in R&D. But then there's the margins associated with selling it as well. And those are fairly standard, I think, across most products in this industry. And what they're based off of is typically manufacturing costs, or the cost to produce it is where it starts, and then it holds fairly constant throughout. One of the things with Ecotech products is you've got to remember is that Ecotech is a big supporter of local fish stores. So the idea is to maintain margins to make sure that there's value in the product for a local fish store to be able to carry it and sell it and make a living, because without a local fish store being able to make money off of dry goods, they're completely dependent on making money off of livestock, which often isn't alone enough to support that, right? And for all of us to succeed, both as hobbyists and in the industry, we need retail locations. I mean, not just brick and mortar, but online as well. But we need these locations to be able to produce them, to obtain a margin and basically succeed in selling the products. Ecotech products, like pretty much all the others, are based off of almost identical margins, to my knowledge. So really, what you're talking about is just it's the cost to make Ecotech products, which we can tell you within our scale of line, just in terms of quality of material and materials involved in them, are generally more expensive to make than some of the competing products available out there.
Yeah. Like you said, like, price of everything has unfortunately gone up, which includes the price of all of the pieces that we need to make Radions. So you think of it that way, like any of our products that we make, there's a lot that goes into it, and the parts that we have to source and the parts that we have to buy to be able to build and make. So again, unfortunately, it is something we wish could change, but until a lot of other things change, it's unfortunately where it's at. It's not something along those lines that we're just doing it to make more money. It's just trying to get you guys the best cost and the best product for the best bang for the.
And also in terms of the design work, it's the same as well as the interest, I think, going forward. And you touched on this before, is to try to cut costs, to reduce prices, to make sure that the viability of all these products continues, right? I mean, you're seeing it in aquariums. People are choosing smaller aquariums because it's less expensive. It's less costly to have a smaller aquarium. You know, and all this stuff that goes along with it is more price sensitive. Now that may change. I mean, historically, you know, like we were talking about, everything's kind of cyclical, and you know, we may find that economic pressure or pressure in the world may change significantly, and all of a sudden stuff gets real inexpensive again, and that will pass all the way right through to aquarium products too.
I mean,
we're all hoping for that. Actually, that would be really good.
It's a point you could talk on forever. I mean, look at the price of a yellow tang, how much that changed and how much that went up. So it's like
absolutely. And as I say, I run a host with some other guys, a live stream. We're always talking about, certainly if we go back a couple of years ago, because you know, from a yellow tang, you haven't got to go back that far. Maybe it is further than I thought. The last one I bought was maybe 6 years ago. That was £30. They're now over £300, and in terms of, because of that's driven a lot by the Hawaii ban, and obviously the cost of freight. So there's a number of factors.
That's it too. With think about products too. Cost of shipping, freight, all of that has to do with the products, because that's skyrocketed recently too. So
I was gonna say, and actually over here, I mean, some of the silver. I mean, you're starting to see some of the stuff. I mean, particularly certain hard corals over here are getting less expensive. I was kind of shocked at the last trade show, how much is available back in the kind of the $15 to $20 price range, which a few years ago everything was kind of getting into this insane. You know, the high end was really expensive, but then you know the medium and low end type stuff for more common corals were also becoming more pricey. And the last time I looked at them, I was like, oh wow, it's actually, you know, this is much more reasonable in terms of what these cost again, for somebody interested in getting into setting up a reef aquarium. Absolutely. So that was kind of positive.
Yeah, and I think with the hobby is expensive, but you can make it simpler and have less kit. Buy once, buy well, or go secondhand. So I think one of the advantages of Ecotech is the secondhand market, which doesn't help you guys sell new kit.
It doesn't matter. Yeah,
market
is really great,
brilliant, because you can buy something that's 2-3 years old. You can see on the box pretty much the manufacturing date, and there's a really good chance that will last you far longer than your tank will last. And we quite often say, if you want a Radion and your budget doesn't stretch to a 6 or a 5, you can get a 4 really good price, and they will grow any product. Any coral, a 4 will grow. And there was a big step up from the 3 to the 4s, because I got the 4s as well. And so therefore it doesn't help you guys for new sales, but I think what it does, it gets people into Ecotech as an entry level, should we call it. And if they like it and they grow in the hobby, then there's a good chance they'll go and buy other Ecotech products, and that might be brand new. So maybe not the new sale today, but maybe the new sale to tomorrow, I guess.
No, I think secondhand market is, like you said, it's definitely a valuable place where you can get good stuff for cheap. I mean, biggest caution I will tell people, because working in customer service side, you have heard horror stories of buying secondhand. So just make sure you check the product out and make sure it all works first. And if it doesn't work, it's probably not our fault. It's probably who you bought it from.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that whether it's any of the kit, check it out, because what you do find sometimes with the Vortex, if you take it out of water for a sustained period and you haven't cleaned it with RO or something like that, salt water is probably one of the most toxic things out there. and it will erode and it will damage anything, any piece of kit you take out for stay. Clean it in citric acid or RO or anything else, because if you go to use it, it will lock and it will
It's with
erode and it
everything.
will
Proper
erupt.
maintenance. Yeah, proper maintenance on anything, especially if you're storing things. That's same
Yeah.
with like old cars and everything like that. I mean, store it if you're going to store it for a long period of time. Make sure you clean it beforehand and take proper care of it.
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
that's a good one. That's a good tip. I think that was one of the tips and tricks, right? It was interesting. Like, it sort of stands to reason. Like, don't leave, even though the plastic's non-reactive. It's like if you leave something in an acid for a long period of time, or you take it out and dry it out and then put it back in salt water and take it out and leave it and let it dry out. Like, obviously those things are going to degrade the plastic faster. Then I mean, which is interesting. You know, you would think, oh, I'm cleaning it really well and all of that, but actually sometimes not being overly aggressive or changing the environment state on particularly on a wet side will actually cause it to last a lot longer.
Some people take them out, store them in their garage, not at temperature controlled. I mean, the humidity, everything could affect all pieces of equipment. So again, just proper maintenance is the best way to.
Absolutely. I found, because years ago people tended to use vinegar to clean certainly the wet sides, and that sometimes would erode and damage the plastic. So now we say, you know, if you use citric acid or something like that, it's a lot. It cleans it, but it's a lot softer and it's not so corrosive on any kit. I would say, don't use vinegar. You're better off using citric acid. I was saying it's just a little bit softer on the materials. As you said, don't dip it for so long either. You don't need to dip it overnight or something like that. An hour, toothbrush, you're sorted.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, even the in-between maintenance, just rinse it off in RO, rinse it off with a toothbrush. I mean, that's all going to come off. It's just when you've neglected it for a little bit, citric acid's definitely the way to go.
Yeah, and you can say that about anything. So go on.
No, but going back to your original point, yeah, I mean, that is absolutely true about the secondary market. It always boggles my mind when you go and look to see what the previous generations of equipment. It's like, it's actually the cost of ownership on a lot of the Ecotech stuff is actually not terribly high when you figure what you could potentially get for it.
No, they do hold their value too.
Really well.
Yeah, so the Gen 3s I bought, they'd only been out about 6 months at the time. I bought a tank breakdown, a complete tank breakdown, fish and everything, and I got it about 50% of the value. So I can't remember what the Gen 3, and I'm still using that Gen 3, one of the Gen 3s over a tank today, as I said earlier. So if I look at that, kind of, you know, that's 9 years, whatever, 50% of the retail price 9 years ago. I kind of think I got the value out of that piece of kit.
A little bit.
For sure. And then the pucks look fine. I check them every so often, and you can tell by are the corals healthy or not, amongst other things. So
I'm actually still running Gen 3 Pros on my frag tank, so they're still kicking.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you don't need to change anything, you haven't got to worry about the fact it's not on Mobius, it's on the EcoSmart, and you know, as long as I don't have to mess around with it, which I don't, that's good, because I don't really want. I've got the reef link sitting over there actually, but the thought of going into that, and I couldn't even, I'll tell you what, I wouldn't even be able to remember how to log in to try and change that on the free, to be fair, but I don't need to. So yeah, it's just kind of as a throwback. Whilst we're talking about product, it'd be good to get some tips from you, that kind of stuff you don't see in a manual across, I suppose, the 4 main ranges of Radions, Vortex, Vectras, and Versas. So now, what's your tips around whether it be maintenance or setting up or using those products? If we start with Radion, what's your kind of tips for consumers on Radions?
I don't know that there's a whole lot. I mean, the most fundamental one is funnily one that you touched on, which is that that actually, if your tank is doing well,
don't touch it.
Don't change your lighting schedule or anything, actually, not just your lighting schedule. But you see a lot less of this now, but back in the day in particular, it was you know, you go back even just a few years, and that was a big one. People seem to have learned that lesson in the hobby, or at least it's become common, you know, knowledge that instead of people trying to chase difference all the time, that you know, it's like set it, let the coral adjust, you know, and let it acclimate. And that would probably be another one, is definitely acclimate coral with lighting. One actually tied into that is one of the interesting things which people probably realize but may or may not realize is a lot, particularly in the UK, same in the US, is a lot of retailers, maybe most retailers use Radion lighting, or a large percentage of them do.
Mm-hmm.
You can just ask them, particularly if you're buying a new or a particularly expensive piece of coral, what they're running their lights at and what intensity. And with that information, you can replicate it pretty easily, just by placing in terms of depth in your tank.
Yeah.
Is probably the best way to put that, rather than don't adjust your whole lighting schedule for one piece of coral, but figure out where in the tank replicates that same level of lighting, and then
slowly increasing and moving. Yeah, I think tips and tricks, I mean, that's going to be the biggest thing. If your tank, and like you said before with your Gen 3, like there's no need to go in and change it. If your tank looks happy and everything looks good, there's no need to touch or change. That's something you see a lot of people doing, and you see someone going, oh, they're running this schedule, I'm going to try running this schedule. And like, if your tank has no issues and it looks good to your eye, I would definitely keep running what you're doing. And if you're just setting up a tank and a Radion for the first time, I would recommend getting a par meter. I think dialing and actually
or
understanding, or borrow one, like borrowing
within
a par
day or
meter.
two of just
Yep.
playing with it, you can
Playing with that, figuring out what the par
Take some
actually
notes.
is and what the intensities actually are, is something that will surprise you.
Yes.
It's something that you don't really know as like the average reefer, because I forever even was, hey, let's just go off the eyeball, look of the eye, and let's see how the corals are reacting, let's see how they're doing. And like, yeah, my tank's doing good, and all of a sudden you see the par afterwards, you're like, man, I would have never guessed it was that. So again, it's just something that it's starting to become more common practice, I think, as people are starting to set them up. But par meters, super
here's a
helpful.
fun one too as well. Hard learned. I always learn all my lessons the hard way. Is if you're gonna change your mounting or do anything involving physically manhandling your lights, take the time to turn them off, take them off of your tank, and get somebody to help you do it, rather than do what I do, which is like try to fiddle with it and then end up almost or potentially actually dumping my expensive lighting into my aquarium. I don't know if anyone else watching this has done this, but I think it's something that we all do in the reefing hobby all too frequently, is like we try to rush through like activities like that, like and that it's funny, we're not really giving any like really good like tips about lighting.
This is kind of bread and butter. I always say, if you're going to make changes or you've got some heavy work to do in a tank, don't do it in the evening, because you end up rushing and you end up messing it up, and you'll get tired, you get a bit narky about it, and then something will go wrong, or you'll forget to turn something back on, or you do something. So we talk about it. So I've had someone who's dumped the Radion, fell into the tank for that very reason. They were messing around. So if I was going to mess around the light, that's why a really decent the cover, the jump guard, that helps to protect any of the kind of
saved by the jump guard.
The Radions, absolutely. Unless the light's really heavy and it goes through the net, usually most things bounce off those things. So that does help. The other thing is, I see a lot of people that mess about with the spectrum on the light, and I get if you're an experienced reef. I've never done it, never felt the need to do it, because I like the templates, and then you just kind of look at the intensity on there. What's your view on, and obviously the flexibility is there, because you talked about it, Jay, at the top, around those people who plug and play with AI around the adaptability, we say, but I think it's a bit of a risk. What's your view on that?
So this is something that I always find kind of, or I personally find like kind of funny, because any quality light out there for aquariums at LED light already has an LED mix that is largely balanced towards a spectrum that will be successful for coral. So what that means is that the blue and white channels, like the LED mix in the fixture, is already heavily oriented towards achieving the spectral peaks that you want when you're running the channel on full across all of the spectrum, right? On all channels, right? So the only way to really mess that up is to really try to do something extreme in terms of deviating from what is on there, like by running I mean, it's actually not even really that possible, but the more you deviate from whatever that spectrum is, I'm saying it's not really possible on our, like on the Radions in particular, but like the more you try to deviate from that, the more likely you are to run into a problem where it's not going to grow coral or provide the right spectrum of light. Because what you're not, it's not like you're getting an equal balance of blue, white, red, green, right? It's not like you have the same amount of energy going in. Already you're getting more blue LEDs, less white LEDs, less red and green, you know, potentially whatever other colors UV are in there.
Yeah,
And
there's a
the ones
balance
that are right. And also people's just tied into that, people's visual acuity is terrible. It's like, as human beings, we cannot, brightness and spectrum, we're actually terrible at being able to properly analyze with our eyes.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, not that that's terribly relevant, but really what it comes down to is that messing with it isn't going to make a huge difference for the most part. And actually, a lot of people think that they're having problems because of their spectrum, and typically it's a problem with their water chemistry,
Yes.
or they have pests or something else.
Yeah.
But really that's it. Like, and that's kind of a tip and a trick with these lights as well, is that actually intensity is probably more important than the spectrum mix if you're leaving them at relatively how they were configured out of the box.
Yeah. I'm kind of gonna jump on that a little bit with it. Like you said, the spectrums are there and made because they have been proven to be successful. Like, a lot of people have made those and had success, and they shared them. So we uploaded them, and we've seen enough success with them to go, hey, we know these work. Now dial in the PAR, dial in the intensity for your size tank. And like you said, you could run it that way. I'm not necessarily against people adjusting it, because other people have preferences for what they like. Some people like a little bit warmer. Some people like a little bit cooler spectrum. So it really depends. I'm really, again, fine with that. Some people are like, no reds and greens. But again, it's all preference and style.
And that won't make really any difference.
It's not going to make
take out the reds
difference on things like that. You might notice different colors in your fish because you're not having the reds and greens.
That's
some different colors in your corals. So again, it's one of those things. It's all preference. We made the spectrums for a reason. I always say to people, if you're going to make changes, right away dial into what you like, and again, run that for an extended period of time. You know the intensity, you know that. Like Jay said, if you're running issues, chances are it's not going to be that lighting causing that issue.
Yeah, because as you said before, the lights, regardless of most brands, will grow coral. It then comes down to personal preference. And as you say, it's far easier to mess something else up or not have it dialed in than the lights. But if you go back X number of years, lights may well have been a factor. In fact, you could probably overcook nowadays rather than undercooking them, I would say. And undercooking is more around the positional in the tank, where it's shading it because something else in the way, or you got it too low, as opposed to the light in itself.
Yeah, so and that's it, like you kind of said, and that's where it's so important to dial it in right away and know where you're at. Like the PAR meter is super helpful for that. Yeah. Again, reiterating that, because like you said, chances are you're not going to have a problem then with light. If you know where your levels are, you know where everything's at, it's not going to be that light, because you know those specific corals like that kind of PAR, that PAR range. So there's probably some other reason in that tank why it's not succeeding. Yeah. So again, if you want to mess with the colors, it's all for it, just because it's your preference in your tank. And like Jay said, it's really hard to make a spectrum or mess up a spectrum too much and not have success. Yes, you take out some colors, you might not get as much coloration in your coral or something along those lines. But again, the peak intensity and all is going to really help with that.
The other thing with programmable lights like the Radion, which people I don't know if people forget this or not, but I certainly forget it myself, and I'm somebody who talks about it all the time. But realistically, you can, the part of the beauty of the programmable light is that you can make the spectrum and the photo periods coincide to fit your life.
Yeah.
And when I say that, obviously, I'll use an example of say somebody who subscribes to the Sanjay theory of coral reef keeping, which is to replicate the Australian shallow reef as closely as possible, which means as much light, as much flow as you can possibly cram into your tank at all times. And that's not an understatement. He lives that, his tank, and he grows coral as faster than anyone I've ever
So
seen.
he runs a high energy tank, doesn't he? Because high flow,
Everything.
high lighting, sometimes people then up the temperature as well, and also their parameters in terms of alkalinity and that. So you raise it up because you've got high energy, high intake, high outtake. So you need all that kind of stuff into a balance.
It's all in balance, right?
Yeah.
But in that particular situation, running everything at maximum might not be very appealing to you in terms of how the tank looks visually.
Yeah.
But maybe you're home at 5 o'clock, so run for an hour, run a period which does something totally different, that is something that you like to look at, because the coral typically responds to DLI as much as it does to par. I mean, we did experiments early on where we proved that, and actually just talking to Carrie down at the Florida aquarium, that's a big thing, is they're replanting stuff onto the reef, is that the amount of energy that the coral receives over the day can vary, or is almost as important a measure to be looking at as what the spot par is in terms of a peak and a minus. And actually, if you go out there, apparently even in highlighting conditions, you'll see the par will vary hugely over a very short period of time as clouds come over, or stuff or sediment in the water, or literally all kinds of things. So the coral can handle that, but it also has a base energy requirement that it needs from the lighting. But because of that, you can play with that, and that was something that we talked about early on, or we discovered early on when we saw two different coral facilities. One where they kept the lights on for, I think, 14 hours, which was Worldwide Corals, and one Reef Wholesale, I think, where they kept it on for 8 hours. And the comparative par levels that they ran at were the inverse of their time frames, and that actually, from a DLI perspective, they came in very close.
So what's DLI? Do you say DLI?
Light intake.
Ah, right.
Yeah,
okay.
Integral, but
integral, yeah. So
it's like on a seed packet, where it shows the regions.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen a seed packet, that's actually sort of the DLI, because that's how agriculture is measured. Because what plants in agriculture care about is the amount of light that they receive over the lighting period, not what they receive at any given moment in time.
So again, it's same thing, like high energy, high output. So longer period, you could run lower par. Shorter period, run higher par, to make sure you're around that same thing. So,
and they both work. I suppose it's down to your preference and how you want to set up your tank. And if you run one quite aggressively, should we say, or intensive, then you surround it with other measures that are the same. Otherwise, you're out of whack, and then of course that damages the livestock as well, or doesn't grow as optimum as it would like in a coral farm. That's the one thing you do want, is stuff that grows really quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
So is that where? So I know the kind of the AB plus and all those kind of templates. I remember reading that was that from coral farms in Canada. So is it that you still do that? You've got a number of different partners, should we call them, or users, that you take that feedback from them and the data, and then that helps the evolution of the Radion product?
Yep. So it's a combination of that, and it's a combination of feedback from customers, because the two objectives are with lighting is to grow coral and achieve maximum color expression, which is a whole nother topic in itself. And then the other one is delivering on what people want, right? And that one is tied to the color, right? It's tied to the color, but it's also tied to things like spread and value, right? And functions, things that the light does. So as we get that information from people, as we see it, as each generation goes by, that gets incorporated in.
I mean, that's prime example of the Radion blue. So the Radion blue is something that forever people are like, I want a bluer Radion. I want more blue. I want bluer. That was actually funny.
And then specifically, why am I paying to have the spectrum that I don't want?
Yeah. For
blue, like the blue user.
Why have whites?
You're right.
I want all Fair blues. Enough. So then we made the blues for that reason. It was actually funny because when the G5 blue they're like, oh, it's too blue, so we had to go a little bit less blue for the G6 blue because it was too much blue, and it was like, well, that's what you guys wanted.
Well, the G6 lets you choose your shade of blue,
Yes.
right? And that's always another funny thing about interpreting feedback is that we all see color slightly differently as well.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
we certainly describe color differently. So, you get two people and it's like, I want more blue, and one person wants more like Windex blue, and the other wants more indigo blue, right? Which are completely opposite. More blue, right? Like more blue. Which blue do you like? So that's what we do. I mean, we take all of that feedback. The blue was a perfect example where we're like, well, you just turn the other colors down. No, I want more, and I don't want to pay for it. Okay, well, we'll give you more value,
more par in the blues.
Yeah. All of your LEDs are now blue.
So hence the two products. And what's the split between the blue and the pros in terms of proportion? 3-1, 5-1? Do you know roughly?
Good
question. I don't know off the top of my head.
For when they first came out, for a while it was about even, and then actually I know the pro slowly but surely came back.
You have a blue right next to you on the box.
I do have
you can see how many blues in the 15. So blue 15.
Oh no, he's talking about people buying.
People buying.
Right. Every 10 XR15s that are bought, how many of them would be blue and how many would be the pros? Just that kind of.
Neither of us are in sales anymore.
But
sorry.
I think blues are tending to be the more popular.
I would say from people I know, blue is the preference.
I think blue's more popular.
Huh. So even between us, we don't necessarily agree.
Pretty sure that's an unfair question because I just thought of it and I thought I'd throw it in there.
I recently checked with a sales guy, I think, and he was saying blues outsell the pros. So which is like you said,
I'd be surprised. I don't believe
I'm telling you, blues.
Because when I checked, it was more like 60-40.
Blues outsell the pros.
Yeah, I must admit, I'd buy the pro because I like white light.
He just likes the pros.
I do like the pros.
He's a pro guy.
More subtle color differentiation.
For me, you can see the fish. With the blue light, you can't. The fish don't really pop. They look washed out blue as you would expect. So I like the corals. Don't get me wrong. That's why I like it's going blue at the moment, and all the tanks go blue. But I do like to sit there and see the fish, and so white is the best color for that, in my humble opinion.
Yep. I noticed that too with clams. Clams are another one. To get all the colors out in clams, a warmer spectrum, a whiter spectrum, you're going to see a lot more colors in your clams than a bluer spectrum.
Well, because you have to have the spectrum, you have to have the light spectrum and not have it overwhelmed for you to be actually able to see it, right? So particularly yellows and pinks were completely, unless they're fluorescing, if they're pigment colors. So like if you look at particularly like a lot of the really the more pastel or subtly colored acropora, the fluorescence, if you go heavy on the blue, will completely annihilate your ability to see any of the other colors. One of the funny things too about this though is that we had our friend Dimitri, him and I always had an argument about which spectrum, whether the natural spectrum or he did 3, but I think it was AB plus or the just native spectrum on the pro would bring out more color in the coral. And I told him that I didn't think it would make any difference.
Yeah.
And he was adamant that it would. And if my memory serves me correctly, he did. And what was crazy was when you had them on their spectrums, the corals looked completely different. Like you would swear that they were different coral because he had the same batch, like the same frags from the same mother colony in three areas under each light. And you would swear they were different until he would switch the spectrum on one to the other, at which point then they would look identical from one group to the next, which was pretty interesting, which shows how much it's your eye, not necessarily what's being expressed on the coral that makes a difference.
And I think it's probably influenced with the blue light. I can imagine blue corals and purple corals are not as popular as they used to be, because if you have a blue or purple coral under blue, it doesn't really
brown.
It's drowned
is it?
out. Yeah.
I know it sounds obvious, but then tastes are driven by the fact that now, green is fantastic under the blue light. Reds and those kind of ones, you get that contrast, don't you? But blue and purple, I'm sure people avoid those colors because under that you don't get on the color palette. It's really difficult to get the pops when they're sitting next to one another, but you can't see the corals. So that's probably influenced the tastes as well. Okay, thank you on that. So we're obviously talking about Radion. Anything in terms of Vortech that you kind of tips other than what we talked about, cleaning, making sure we maintain them, don't use too much of an aggressive cleaner, I would say certainly on the Vortex helps their longevity. Is there anything else?
I mean, mount them properly is going to be the biggest thing because
Use
those
the
dry
tab.
side, use the hanging tabs, have the wire go up because seen so many times and times again, snail gets in there, jams up the wet side, the dry side continues to run, it falls off the tank and decouples. Anything along those lines. If the dry side falls, cats anything like that. Dry side's going to be the most expensive part to replace. So, I mean, just properly install it and just protect yourself, protect your equipment. I mean, that's going to be the biggest thing. Vortex have been out forever. I don't personally think there's any new tips or tricks or secrets to them. But other than that, I think.
I think one of the other things is using the random modes is a big benefit of a Vortech, and really any powerhead if it has that capability. Simply because we all know that it's crazy when you switch over to those modes after you've been running the same mode, even a mode that has some variation to it, like a pulsing mode, but you switch to a random where you start to get different movement in the tank, you will just see that detritus come out of everywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And obviously getting rid of that is just, that's just a big benefit. And that's one of the things which was originally one of the major drivers of people loving the Vortech was the mode variation. And the sync anti-sync for that same reason was to just completely change the water flow direction in the tank because it clears up. So there's just a huge amount of functionality in Vortex, which I don't think people really utilize that much. And just taking some time, that's one where playing with it is not going to hurt your tank the same way that messing too much with your lighting, what on an established tank is going to do. So it's worth investigating because we put all that stuff in there because it made sense. People liked it. And
don't be afraid to change your flow essentially and just play around with it.
I would agree. So I use maybe 5 or 6 during the day. The one I like the most is the wave. And you have to kind of set it. So I've got a 3-foot tank with 2 MP40s at one end, and it's just at the right level. That's kind of about half an inch from the top, and you're thinking this is going to go over, and it doesn't. And then what I do overnight, I sometimes put it on a crest mode and turn it up really high for 30 minutes because a lot of the LPS have then shrunk because those corals that don't like a lot of flow, actually they'll shrink at night anyway, so therefore you blast it doesn't affect them, but then that's when you can get the detritus I find at night because obviously there's less coral out and therefore you've actually got more space for the wave maker to push the water around. So I do that for about half an hour quite high that I wouldn't do during the day because the corals will absolutely hate it and they get absolutely, a lot of them they don't mind being battered, should we say, but others that I find have got scolly, if that gets a little bit too much it starts retracting. So some and bubble corals hate a lot of flow as well. So at night the bubbles are hardly out because if you on a bubble coral too much flow and they burst. So I think understanding your corals and then night's a great time I think to turn up the flow, and a lot of the fish, the fish don't worry about it anyway other than pipefish and
I think that's kind of the biggest thing. It's just flow in general. I think the general public is afraid of flow. I don't think a lot of people use enough flow in their tank. Obviously, when you're talking about the people who understand reef tanks, they're not afraid of flow. But I think the general public, when it comes to the reef tanks, they're definitely afraid of flow. And a lot of tanks that I see are underflowed. So
I'll use Sanjay's tank again as an example, is that particularly with the acroporas and the hard corals, is they'll take pretty much as you can give them, to the point where he had coral the last time we visited his tank that actually grows around the flow. So it's like, okay, too much flow, and it just keeps growing, and it grew circle around around, which and that's because he runs everything at 100%. But But yeah, I mean, and I think you kind of summed it up with livestock. It's looking at it, right? It's just taking a look and being kind of
Aware.
common sense about what it is. But also to your point though, is that oftentimes even a small locational change in the tank, even from a flow perspective, can be quite significant. So oftentimes, by moving the power head slightly, you can actually run it higher and still accommodate some of your lower flow coral. But I really like your suggestion about changing it up at night, particularly for carbon dioxide exchange too.
Yeah, absolutely. That water movement on the top, which breaks the surface, which helps as well, especially at night when pH and the oxygen essentially drops in your tank. And I think also we talk about flow and coral, but if people have got tangs and others, there are some tanks like Achilles tank. I've got someone I know that's got an Achilles tank, absolutely loves lots of flow, and if it doesn't have as much flow, it gets more aggressive because of where it comes from. They're in really high intensity waves. So I think from a fish perspective, understanding and how you mix it up, and you might, having a pipe fish and a lot of flow doesn't always work, but having a tank with lots of flow is almost a certainty if you want to try. You can't eradicate, but trying to take that aggression level down. But of course, then you need to feed more because they're expending more energy. So again, it's that whole thing around the ecosystem and how do you balance it as much as you can. That you say it's a little bit of the ocean, but the reality is it's completely false. And we're just trying to replicate it, and then how do you best do that? So I think flow and fish is not talked about that often, but it's really important in certain types of fish that they get sufficient flow to help them survive, I would say.
Yeah, keep them, like you said, the stress levels, everything like that. I mean, just understanding flow of fish, and again, understand your livestock in general as a whole with your flow, and even understanding how to like place your flow. I mean, Vortex are one of those unique ones with placement. It's people always ask, they're like, "Where's the best spot to put my Vortex?" Like, there isn't really a good answer to that because it really depends on everything. Like you said, your fish, your coral, your rock structure, your substrate. Do you have fine substrate? Do you have coarser substrate? What kind of return pump are you running? Okay, you're not running a powerful return pump. Let's put it up higher on the surface to get that water agitate. Like, there's so many different.
But all that aside, wherever you can get the longest run unobstructed is basically the truth for any powerhead, including Vortex.
Because you can just get that stirring up. And you've got the opposite, the sink, and then sometimes if you've got two rocks, they're kind of scapes there, you got there, they can crash and you can get it in the middle. So I think you then play, and the rock scape plays a massive part in that can create the flow or block the flow completely. That's arguably the thing that influences it more. And of course, then the corals, because that acts just as an extension of the rock scape, doesn't it? I suppose in that respect. Okay, I think that's it in terms of products. So thank you very much. And really, there is, I know you may not think so, there's some really good tips in there. Because I think it's a bit like when people say about what do you check? Salinity is the number one thing to check. But how many people don't check salinity, especially when doing water changes? And quite often when people have trouble with the tank, you say, have you done your salinity? And you find that out. Yeah, you think that to me is probably the number one thing to check. Yeah, how many times have we all fallen foul of your salinity is out of whack because you haven't checked it? So the basics.
Now that you're mentioning it, I'm like, I don't remember the last time I checked the salinity.
Luckily, I have my salinity
Did you
probe
check my salinity last time you changed it?
Yeah, and then when you have probes and stuff like that, how often do you calibrate them? Because that's another thing around with the technology. It's great, but you do find that you have to calibrate stuff.
Checks and balances always with everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we just kind of move on to Aperture as a company, invested in, I suppose, Neptune, BRS, Ecotech. Are you able to say a little bit about that, about how that, I suppose, what that meant, how that works in the future, the connectivity, that kind of thing? Because that would be really useful. Because some people will know about Aperture and the connectivity with those three. Probably some of the three biggest brands, should we say, that's out there, and BRS.
We would like to think so. Yeah, it's true though, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and that's it, right? Is that I mean, some people will be familiar with the name Aperture, some won't. If you're not, it's not really all that significant because there's actually There's a whole umbrella of brands under the Aperture brand, and Aperture is obviously a US-based company. So amongst our brands, there's some manufactured in-house, there's a sales channel, and then also there's exclusive distribution of other brands from the US and from elsewhere that are distributed by Aperture Distribution, sold through the sales channel, sold through the distribution company. So in terms of that, it's not a terribly exciting thing for the public or for the reef aquarists to be familiar with. But where, you know, from a strategic standpoint, what's really cool is exactly the kind of stuff we were just talking about, really, which is that as one company with these different angles, it just increases the ability of each individual thing to function in a way that leverages the whole, right? And case in point is we just on the Neptune brand, we just released version 2 of the dose pump, which incorporates a bunch of mechanical improvements over the original dose based on user feedback and experience. But it also incorporates a technological improvement that was borrowed from the Ecotech product lineup, which is the quiet drive integration, because who doesn't want certainly compared to the original dose, a significantly quieter dosing pump. And then likewise, obviously, we have a larger resource base, which allows us to bring out, you know, as individual brands bring out products more quickly. So integration's a big part of it, because there's obviously an economy there, but there's also a major benefit to our user community and to the brand value. And then the other part of it is, you know, is resource, really, is just this ability to do things a little bit quicker, a little bit more organized. And I mean, let's be honest, like, for instance, Ecotech and Neptune had a somewhat tumultuous relationship going into the final furlongs. Yeah. And prior to that, Ecotech and AI did, and following Ecotech and AI, you know, I think from an end user's perspective, is obviously competition sometimes breeds benefit, but it also, what people don't realize is how much time and duplication it is that would you rather have 5 products, or would you rather have 4 where there's only 2 because 2 are the same? Right. And that's kind of what the difference is between a competitive and a synergistic relationship between 2 companies, which is what we talked about earlier, for instance, with the pumps. So, yeah, I mean, that's it, really. I mean, you'll just hopefully see more integration, more faster product development, and hopefully over time, cost reduction would be another one, as weird as it sounds in a time where everything's getting more expensive. But that is usually what comes with economy of scale.
So have you been able to pull together, I suppose, the R&D a bit more? Because obviously they would have been separate companies, therefore the R&D would have been separate, but then therefore they can work together and share concepts. And to your point, the technology from, was it the Versa that's gone into the
so
DOS?
It's actually the technology from the Vortech QD, so all the pumps, the quiet drive.
The quiet drive, right?
Quiet drive. So it's the pumps, the same type of pump as the dose. We didn't just take the Versa and put it in the dose. Yeah. It's still the dose pump. It's going to be that stepper motor that it is using. We just did the driver and took the driver and improved on that, as well as the continuous dose. So we changed a couple features of it. But yeah, like you said, the R&D team, the engineering team, definitely you're going to see a lot more benefits coming out from there. The brains that you have working on them, that were some of the brain powers from, like you said, I mean, you said it yourself, the top brands in the industry, developing some of the most innovative equipment, and then bringing all those brains together. And then again, like you said, just creating the best equipment possible, and then finding which brand it fits best under, and being able to put that. So yeah, we're working together as a team across all brands, and then just trying to come out with the best products we can possibly for all reefers and aquarists.
Do you see an acceleration of the products coming out? Because I must admit, my perception would have been that there would have been more products out from Neptune, and the Ecotech has been fairly quiet. Whereas AI, certainly, this is my perception, AI has been far more, I suppose more products have come out with That's my perception anyway of that. Because if you look on the Ecotech, I don't think there's been anything since the Versa, has there? I don't know. It's kind of 4 key core products, isn't there? Within there, I wouldn't expect that to go from 4 to 10 or anything like that, because you've got the other product range, haven't you, from the other brands? But
yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail there on the head. And like you said, I mean, where the products are coming out kind of just sees where it fits best with the brands. Every brand has its own identity. And like you said, we want to stay true to that. We don't want to deviate from what those brands have been good at before and what they continue to be good at. It's not something we're just going to, okay, this is the next product, this brand needs this. No, we're coming up with what's the best product that we can make right now, what's most needed right now, and then where is that fitting in the line. So it's not one of those things, obviously, we don't forget about the other brands and that. We just want to make sure they keep true to what those brands were. And that's the biggest thing. We just want to make sure we keep those brands moving forward as customers like them before. Keep those brands basically the same, because they were successful brands and they were successful companies on their own. So we just want to keep that mindset moving forward with all those brands. And Ecotech historically, like you said, 4 products, but they are some of the best products out there for those ranges. So there's no need to just rush products out for that. We want to make sure that they are the right products for the Ecotech brand.
I think you can see too, I mean, in terms of the products launched, particularly on the AI brand, I mean, some of these are, I mean, obviously everything goes through our internal engineering as well, but like some of these are not designs which were developed in-house. They're designs which have been on the market, which have been augmented to be benefited by technology that we have in-house. And for instance, the AI, I mean, the pumps that have come out on the AI line, the Axis and the Orbit, you know, really fit with the driver technology that's running on the Nero. Whereas, for instance, the drivers running Vortex, for example, weren't as good of a match, as well as the fact that, you know, the product itself fits well with what the AI user base and customer in particular is looking for as well. And then Ecotech users who want to use them absolutely can, because they integrate with the Mobius control platform, but it's equipment-wise, it's just a little bit different in terms of what the value proposition of what they develop or deliver.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. I think that's about it, actually. I've gone through all the questions that I had, and we're an hour and a half in. So thank you very much, guys, for your time. I've really enjoyed it. I think thank you for everyone who's watched. Any comments, any questions, please put them in below. And if there's anything there I can't answer, then guys, I'll be in touch, and then maybe you can jump on the comments and answer those questions of anything. But thank you very much. I really, and I'm just saying this, I really enjoy the Ecotech products. We haven't really touched upon Neptune, and I'm a Neptune user for years and years, but I don't really, there hasn't been that much new stuff on the market from my perspective, but I like Neptune. AI I've only really just got into recently, to be fair, with the Nero. I think that's the only product I've actually got, but hey, that's because I've got the Nano, so that fits in with that. So Jay Cade, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you guys with us, and that's it. So thank you for everyone for watching, and see you on the next.
Thank you very much for having us, Paul. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it. We could talk about this stuff forever. So hour and a half is nothing for us.
We joke that we could probably have a 24-hour talk show live stream.
No, at the end of the day, it kind of speaks for itself. It's just, we're passionate about the stuff. We love the aquarium space. We love all the products we do. We love all the innovation. So again, we appreciate talking to you, and we enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Pleasure's all mine. But thank you very much, and thank you for watching.